18 months after my husband passed away, a contractor knocked on my bedroom door and said, "Ma'am, you need to come see something. We found a safe hidden inside your wall, and there's a note on it with your name. Good morning, dear listeners. It's Hannah, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please like this video, stay until the very end, and let me know which city you're listening from. It means the world to me to know how far these stories travel. For 34 years, I believed Thomas and I had no secrets between us. We were the couple other people pointed to at church potlucks and said, "That's what it's supposed to look like." He was a civil engineer, methodical and steady, a man who kept a running list of home repairs in a yellow legal pad and never left dishes in the sink. We raised 2 daughters together in our craftsman-style home in Asheville, North Carolina, a house we'd bought when the girls were still in elementary school and slowly, lovingly restored over the decades. Thomas refinished the hardwood floors himself. I painted every room. We planted the garden together in the spring of our 15th anniversary and watched it grow wild and beautiful every year since. When Thomas died of a stroke 16 months before any of this happened, I thought the hardest part of my life had already arrived. I was wrong. The morning the contractors found the safe, I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching the birds at the feeder. Thomas had hung outside the window 3 summers ago. I had hired a small crew to renovate the upstairs bathroom and expand the master bedroom closet. Thomas had always meant to do it himself. Getting it done felt like finishing something for him. The contractor, a quiet man named Gerald, who'd come recommended by my neighbor, appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. His hands were dusted with drywall powder, and he was turning his work gloves over and over in his fingers. "Mrs. Hartley," he said carefully. When we opened up the wall between the closet and the bathroom, we found something built into the framing. It's a small floor safe, the kind you mount inside a wall, and there's a laminated card taped to the front of it. He paused. "It has your name on it." I followed him upstairs. The wall had been peeled back in a neat section, exposing the insulation and the wooden framing beneath. And there, set flush into the studs, was a gray metal safe about the size of a shoebox. The laminated card read, in Thomas's handwriting, "For Eleanor only. If I am gone, this belongs to her alone." My hands shook so badly Gerald offered to dial the combination for me. But Thomas had used the same combination for everything since 1987, our wedding anniversary, and I knew it by heart. Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was a USB flash drive. Beneath it lay a single folded piece of paper with 2 words written on it. "Watch first." I thanked Gerald, sent his crew home for the day, and sat down at the desk in Thomas's old study with my laptop. I plugged in the drive. There was one file on it, a video dated 14 months before Thomas died. When his face appeared on the screen, I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. He was sitting in this very study, in this very chair. He was wearing the blue flannel shirt I'd given him for Christmas 2 years before he died. He looked healthy, or at least not yet sick, and he was speaking directly into the camera with the focused calm of a man who had thought very carefully about what he needed to say. "Eleanor," he began, "if you're watching this, then I wasn't able to tell you this in person. I'm sorry for that. I want you to know I've been trying to figure out the right moment, but the right moment never seemed to come, and I was afraid. I was afraid of what this knowledge would do to us, to our family. But you need to know." He took a slow breath. "About 6 months ago, my brother Richard came to me with a document. He told me that years ago, before we were married, our father had made a verbal promise to divide his estate equally between us, and that when Dad died and left everything to me, Richard felt cheated. He said he'd had a lawyer draw up something that formalized what he called a prior agreement, and he wanted me to sign it. The document stated that upon my death, Richard would receive this house and half of our savings. I stopped the video. My chest felt like something had collapsed inside it. My brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, Richard, whom I had known for 34 years, who had been a groomsman at our wedding, who sat at my Thanksgiving table every year and called my daughters his nieces and bounced their children on his knee. That Richard. I pressed play again. I refused to sign it. Thomas continued. I told him that whatever Dad had or hadn't promised was between Dad and him, and that I wasn't going to sign away Eleanor's security on the basis of a supposed conversation that happened 40 years ago. He was furious. He said I owed him. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd find another way to get what he believed was his. Thomas's jaw tightened. I didn't tell you because I hoped he'd let it go. I hoped that once he calmed down, he'd remember that we were family and that family doesn't do this to each other. He looked directly into the camera. But I know Richard, and I know that if I'm gone and he believes there's money to be taken, he won't let it go. So I am putting this here, in our wall, where only you would think to look, where I know you'll find it if you ever open up that closet like we always talked about. I have also placed a sealed copy of this recording and a written affidavit with my attorney, Margaret Owens, at the Owens Law Group on Marymount Avenue. She has instructions to give it to you if anyone ever contests the estate. I love you more than I can say in a video. Fight for our home. Don't let him take what we built. You have every right to it. The screen went dark. I sat in that chair for a long time without moving. Then I picked up my phone and called my daughter. My older daughter, Caroline, answered on the second ring. Mom? Is everything okay? I need you to come over, I said. And bring your sister, if you can reach her. Within the hour, both my daughters were sitting in Thomas's study watching the video on the laptop. Caroline watched with her arms crossed and her face going progressively more rigid. My younger daughter, Diane, covered her eyes twice during it and didn't uncover them. When it ended, Caroline said, Uncle Richard, not a question. We need to call an attorney, Diane said immediately. She was always the practical one. Mom, before we do anything else, I already had one in mind. I called Margaret Owens the next morning. She picked up immediately when I gave my name. Her voice was warm, but serious. Mrs. Hartley, I was wondering when I might hear from you. I have a sealed envelope from your husband that I've been holding for the past year. He told me to give it to you if his estate was ever challenged or if his brother made any claims against your property. Has something happened? I found the safe, I said. There was a brief pause. Then, I think you should come in today. Her office was a converted Victorian house, not far from downtown, warm and a little cluttered with law books, the kind of office that felt like it had been quietly solving people's problems for decades. Margaret Owens was a small woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. She shook my hand firmly and sat me down across from her desk. Before we get to the envelope, she said, I need to tell you something. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from an attorney representing your brother-in-law. He's claiming that he and your husband had a signed agreement giving him rights to the family home and 50% of the marital estate upon your husband's death. She set a document on the desk in front of me. This is a copy of what they sent. I looked at it. It was 2 pages, dense with legal language. At the bottom was what appeared to be my husband's signature, notarized by someone named Paul Garrett. That is not Thomas's signature, I said. I believe you, Margaret said, but we're going to need more than your word. Now, let's open your husband's envelope. Inside was a notarized, witnessed affidavit in Thomas's handwriting. 3 pages long, describing every detail of the confrontation with my brother-in-law, dated more than a year before Thomas died. It described the fake document, Richard's demands, and Thomas's refusal to sign. It stated clearly that no agreement of any kind had been made, that Thomas had never signed any document transferring property rights, and that any document purporting to show otherwise was fraudulent. He had signed it in front of 2 witnesses and a notary public. "Your husband was very thorough," Margaret said quietly. "He was an engineer," I said. "He documented everything." "Good. Because your brother-in-law has just filed a legal claim against the estate?" "We received formal notice yesterday." I stared at her. "He filed it before I even found the safe. He's been watching for the right moment. The renovation permit was public record. He knew you were opening up the walls." I thought about that for a moment. My brother-in-law had been monitoring my renovation permit. He had been waiting. For 18 months since Thomas died, he had been patient, watching, planning. "What exactly is he claiming?" I asked. Margaret put on her reading glasses. "He's claiming the home, valued at approximately $1.8 million, plus 50% of the savings and investment accounts, which puts his total claim at roughly $1.4 million. His attorney is a man named Gerald Ferris. He's aggressive, and he works primarily in estate litigation. And the notary on the document? Paul Garrett?" Margaret's expression didn't change. "Paul Garrett is Richard's former college roommate. He's a notary, technically licensed. But his relationship with your brother-in-law is relevant. What do we do? First, we respond to the claim with Thomas's affidavit and the video. Second, we hire a forensic document examiner to analyze the signature on their supposed agreement. If it's forged, and I believe it is, that's not a civil matter. That's a crime." She looked at me steadily over her glasses. "Mrs. Hartley, are you prepared to fight this? It will be unpleasant. Your brother-in-law will say things about your marriage, about Thomas, about you. He'll try to paint you as someone who kept a good man away from his family. Thomas was not kept from anyone," I said. "He chose exactly how to spend his time and who to spend it with. I know the truth. My daughters know the truth. And apparently Thomas knew this was coming and made sure the truth was documented." "Good," Margaret said simply. "Then let's get to work." I drove home that afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in 18 months of grief. Purpose. I was frightened, yes, but under the fear was something hard and clear. Thomas had trusted me with this. He had prepared as much as he could, and then placed the rest in my hands. That evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it. "Eleanor." My brother-in-law's voice was smooth, almost friendly. "I heard you had some renovations going on over there. How's the house looking?" I said nothing. "I think we should sit down and talk," he continued. "Like adults, like family. I know this feels adversarial right now, but it doesn't have to be. Thomas and I had an understanding, and all I want is what was rightfully mine. If we can settle this between us, no courts, no attorneys, we can both walk away without dragging the family through something ugly." "Did Thomas sign a document with you?" I asked. A brief pause. "We had an agreement." "Did he sign a document?" "The details of that are something we can discuss in person." "I have nothing to discuss with you," I said. The next morning, I gathered everything I could find. 34 years of bank statements and tax returns. Cards Thomas had written me. Emails and voicemails. Christmas photos with Richard present, smiling, arm around Thomas. No sign of any grievance. Documentation of Thomas's relationship with his brother that showed, year after year, a normal, if not especially close relationship between 2 men who had grown up together and lived separate adult lives. Nothing that resembled an estrangement. Nothing that looked like Thomas had been hiding a secret obligation. I also found something else in the filing cabinet. A letter Thomas had written to Richard, dated 4 months before he died, that began, Richard, I have told you my answer, and it is no. Do not contact me about this again. Thomas had kept a copy. I brought everything to Margaret's office in 2 cardboard boxes. This is excellent, she said. And our document examiner has already begun his analysis of the forged signature. I expect his preliminary findings within the week. What about the notary? Paul Garrett? We filed a complaint with the State Notary Commission. If he notarized a forged document, his license is at risk, and he knows it. People tend to start cooperating when their professional standing is threatened. 3 days later, my brother-in-law's wife called me. Her name was Sandra, and in 30 years of family gatherings, I had always found her pleasant enough. A woman who talked too much about her garden and deferred to my brother-in-law in all things. I had never had strong feelings about her in either direction. Eleanor, she said, I'm calling without Richard's knowledge. I want you to know I'm sorry about all of this. I told him this was wrong. I told him Thomas never agreed to any of this, that he was making up a story he'd told himself so many times he started believing it. Then why is he pursuing it? A long pause. Because we're in debt. We've been in debt for a long time. The business hasn't done well in years. He saw the value of your house and the account balances after Thomas died, and I think something just broke in him. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. He forged the signature himself. Eleanor. I watched him practice Thomas's handwriting at the kitchen table. I told him not to. He didn't listen. I felt cold all over. Sandra, I need you to tell that to my attorney. I'm afraid of what he'll do. I understand that. But you just told me your husband committed forgery. If this goes to court, and you knew about it and said nothing, you could be implicated. Please call Margaret Owens. Today, she did. The next week was the kind of controlled chaos that I imagine all legal battles feel like from the inside. Margaret filed a formal fraud complaint with the local sheriff's office based on Sandra's sworn statement and the document examiner's preliminary report, which found, with a high degree of certainty, that the signature on my brother-in-law's agreement was not consistent with any of the dozens of authenticated samples of Thomas's handwriting we had provided. My brother-in-law, I learned, had also escalated. He filed an emergency motion claiming I was dissipating marital assets by proceeding with the renovation. He tried to get a temporary freeze on the home sale, arguing that it was subject to his claim. He submitted an affidavit from a former business associate of Thomas's, a man I'd never met, claiming that Thomas had spoken to him about his intention to make things right with his brother. Margaret was unfazed. He's throwing paper, she said. When they don't have substance, they file motions and hope something sticks. But every false affidavit he submits is evidence of a pattern. Caroline called one evening to check in and found me quieter than usual. Mom, are you okay? I'm tired, I said honestly. I look at my brother-in-law and I think about all the years we spent at the same table, and I wonder how much of it was real. Whether he always saw us as an asset to eventually collect, he was real when he needed to be. Caroline said, people like that are good at real when it serves them. Your father saw it, I said. He saw it coming and he still couldn't bring himself to tell me. I used to think that was a flaw. Now, I think it was just love. He wanted to protect me from carrying it too. He did protect you, she said. The court date arrived on a Tuesday in October, 2 months after Gerald's crew had knocked on my bedroom door. The courthouse was a handsome red brick building on the town square, and the air outside was sharp with fall, the trees along the street blazing orange and red. Caroline and Diane sat behind me. Margaret was composed and unhurried at our table. Across the aisle, my brother-in-law sat with his attorney, Gerald Ferris, a broad-shouldered man who came in like he owned the room. Ferris opened by painting a picture. 2 brothers, raised in the same home, one of whom grew wealthy while the other struggled. A dying father's promise, made in private, honored in good faith by one son and ignored by the other. A document signed and notarized, representing the only thing his client had ever asked for. Mr. Hartley trusted his brother, Ferris said. He trusted him with a verbal agreement, and then years later he put it in writing, and that writing should be honored. When Margaret rose, she was quiet and precise. Your Honor, the document submitted by the plaintiff has been analyzed by Robert Kimball, a certified forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience and over 200 court qualifications. His report, submitted as Exhibit A, finds that the signature attributed to Thomas Hartley shows characteristics inconsistent with Thomas Hartley's actual handwriting across more than 40 authenticated samples spanning 3 decades. Specifically, the pen pressure, the slant angle, and the formation of the letters H and T in the surname demonstrate statistically significant divergence from the authenticated samples. She paused to let that settle. Furthermore, the notary who authenticated this document, Paul Garrett, has submitted a revised statement to this court, admitting that he did not witness Thomas Hartley sign this document. He notarized it based on the plaintiff's assurance that the signature was legitimate. She looked at the judge. That is not how notarization works, and Mr. Garrett's license has been suspended pending investigation. My brother-in-law's jaw tightened. We also have, Your Honor, a sworn affidavit from Sandra Hartley, the plaintiff's wife, describing watching her husband practice the deceased's handwriting at the kitchen table. Margaret turned and looked directly at my brother-in-law, and we have a written letter dated 4 months before Thomas Hartley's death, in which he explicitly tells his brother that his answer is no and requests that he not raise the matter again. She picked up one more document. Finally, we have a video affidavit recorded by Thomas Hartley 14 months before his death, witnessed, notarized, and held in sealed custody by this office throughout that period. In it, Thomas Hartley describes his brother's demand, his refusal, and his fear that this very lawsuit would be filed after his death. He states clearly, on camera, that he never signed any agreement and that any document purporting to show otherwise is fraudulent. She clicked a button on the laptop, and Thomas's face appeared on the screen in the courtroom. I watched my brother-in-law watch my husband speak from beyond his own death. The color drained from his face slowly, the way water drains from a tub. And he sat there with a stillness that looked less like composure and more like a man who has just understood that everything he built is falling. When the video ended, the judge, a tall man in his 60s, named Honorable Wayne Pruitt, removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I've been on this bench for 19 years, he said quietly. I want to say that clearly, because I want you to understand the weight behind what I'm about to say. What has been presented here today is not a contested estate dispute. It is not a case of ambiguous intentions or competing legitimate claims. What has been presented here today is evidence of premeditated fraud, forgery, perjury by a licensed notary, and an attempt to steal from a widow using a document that was fabricated at a kitchen table. My brother-in-law's attorney tried to speak. Mr. Ferris, I suggest you let me finish. The judge's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The claim against Eleanor Hartley's estate is dismissed in its entirety. The home, the savings, and all assets are confirmed as belonging solely to Mrs. Hartley, consistent with Thomas Hartley's properly executed will, which was probated without challenge and is not subject to any external agreement that has not been produced in authenticated form. He looked at my brother-in-law directly. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of criminal forgery. I am also sanctioning the plaintiff for bringing a fraudulent claim before this court. That sanction is $45,000, payable to Eleanor Hartley within 60 days. My brother-in-law made a sound I had never heard a grown man make before. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court is referring Paul Garrett's conduct to the State Attorney General's office. Notarizing a document you did not witness, particularly in furtherance of fraud, carries significant criminal exposure. I trust Mr. Garrett has consulted with an attorney of his own by now. Ferris was already gathering his papers. He looked like a man calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Case dismissed. We're adjourned. Caroline's arms were around me before I was fully standing. Diane was crying, which she would never admit to afterward. Margaret shook my hand with both of hers and said, "Your husband was a very wise man," and I found I couldn't answer her for a moment. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I came face to face with my brother-in-law. He was alone. Ferris was already gone, presumably putting distance between himself and a client who had just been referred to the DA. My brother-in-law looked smaller than he had in the courtroom, older somehow, as if the last few months had accelerated something in him. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was rough. I stopped walking. "I want you to know that I convinced myself it was real," he said. I told the story so many times that I believed it. Our father did say things, when we were young, about keeping it equal. I built a whole edifice on those words. "Thomas's signature isn't on any real document," I said. "You practiced it at your kitchen table. Your wife told the court that." He flinched. "I know. Then you know there's nothing I can say to you that makes any of this better. I just wanted you to understand that I didn't think of myself as a villain." "Nobody does," I said. "That's not the same as not being one." I walked away from him and out into the October sunlight, and my daughters were on either side of me, and I breathed in the cold, sharp air and felt something lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even fully known I was carrying. In the weeks that followed, the pieces settled into place with a kind of terrible logic that felt like the world correcting itself. My brother-in-law was formally charged with forgery in the second degree. The district attorney's office moved quickly once the civil court referral came through. He faced a potential prison sentence and, regardless of the outcome, the public criminal charge effectively ended his small construction business. Contractors don't get referrals when their owners are in the news for forging dead men's signatures. Paul Garrett lost his notary commission and faced his own misdemeanor charge for willful misconduct. He ultimately accepted a plea arrangement that included community service and a permanent bar from ever serving as a notary again. Sandra filed for divorce 2 weeks after the court date. She called me once, briefly, to apologize again. I thanked her for her honesty in court and wished her well, and meant it. The $45,000 sanction arrived, paid in installments from my brother-in-law's business account, which his attorney had apparently advised him to liquidate quickly. I didn't spend it on anything extravagant. I put it in a college fund for my grandchildren, which felt like the right place for it. That winter, I had the renovation finished. The bathroom was beautiful, and the closet was large and full of light, and Gerald's crew patched the wall where the safe had been, and I had them leave the safe in place, empty now, built into the frame of the house. It felt like a memorial of sorts, to Thomas's foresight, to the love that had thought ahead and prepared and protected. I had a good Christmas that year. Caroline and her family came from Charlotte and Diane, and her husband drove up from Atlanta, and we had the tree in the corner of the living room where it always went. And I cooked the things Thomas had loved, the roasted potatoes and the apple pie with the lattice crust. And we sat around the table and I looked at my daughters' faces and felt, for the first time since Thomas died, genuinely whole. I started a watercolor class in January, which I mention only because Thomas had always said I should, and I'd always said I didn't have time. It turned out I did have time. I had plenty of it, and learning to make something beautiful with it felt like another form of honoring him. In the spring, Diane called me on a Sunday evening, which was her usual time, and she said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Dad built that safe into the wall himself. He mounted it, set the combination. He never told you it was there." "No," I said, "but he used your anniversary as the combination." "I hadn't thought about that." "He knew you'd find it," she said. even if no one told you it was there. He knew that whenever you finally opened up that wall, you'd try the one combination you'd both remember. He built a lock that only you could open. I sat with that for a while after we hung up. Outside, the garden was coming back up. The peonies Thomas had planted the spring before he died, pushing through the dark soil in thick red fists. The bird feeder swayed a little in the breeze. He had known. He had always planned, always prepared, always thought 3 steps ahead. And when he couldn't be there to protect me himself, he had done the next best thing. He had trusted me. He had tucked the truth somewhere, only I would find it, and left a lock that only I could open. "Don't let him take what we built," he had said. "You have every right to it." Right. I had fought. I had stood in a courtroom and let the truth speak for itself. And the truth had been enough. There are people who spend their lives building stories that justify taking what isn't theirs. And there are people who spend their lives building something real. I know which kind of life I had. I know which kind of man Thomas was. Stand your ground. Document everything. Trust the people who have earned it. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them. What would you have done in my place? Would you have settled? Or would you have opened the safe and let the truth do its work? Tell me in the comments. And thank you, as always, for listening. You're stronger than you think. And the people who love you are watching out for you even when you can't see them.